She sent a telegram, and someone ended up dead. Welcome to Clue Hunt. I am your host, Thornwick. Let me know in the comments where are you watching this chilling mystery from. I always look forward to reading your thoughts. Let's begin. The sky over Boulevard Richard Lenoir hung low, like a damp wool blanket pressing gently on the rooftops. A steady drizzle had begun mid-morning and hadn't let up since, turning the city's cobblestones slick and dark. From the window of his office on the Quai d'Orfèvres, Chief Inspector Maigret watched the droplets trace slow, meandering paths down the glass. Behind him, the radiator clanked faintly, trying to fight the chill that had crept into the room. He wasn't working, not exactly. A report from the prefecture about a burglary in the 16th lay unopened on his desk. He had taken out his pipe earlier but hadn't lit it. It sat in the curve of his palm like a memory. He was thinking of Madame Maigret, who had left that morning in her usual calm way, wrapped in her thick blue coat and carrying a small parcel. She was visiting her cousin in Savers, someone Maigret had never quite taken to. They had exchanged the usual remarks over breakfast, the milkman's lateness, the butcher's growing prices, and parted with a kiss by the door. But something in her smile had stayed with him, a hesitation, or perhaps not that, perhaps. He was only imagining it now in the rain. He rose, not from restlessness, but from something softer, a kind of internal prompting, like the twitch of a line underwater. He took his coat, heavy and worn at the cuffs, and stepped out. It was just after midday, but Paris already looked as if it had begun to fold itself into evening. The pavements shimmered. A woman passed under an umbrella patterned with violets. Two boys in caps kicked a ball through the puddles. Everything was ordinary. Maigret walked. He had no destination until, somehow, he found himself in the Rue Caulaincourt, near Montmartre. He didn't come here often, but today his feet had chosen it. As he paused by a café, a small figure hurried across the street. A woman, perhaps 40, dressed in a beige coat too thin for the weather. She hesitated by a tobacconist's, glanced over her shoulder, and went inside. Maigret watched without intention. There was no reason to follow her, and yet he remained at the corner, sheltered under the café's awning, fishing for matches in his pocket. When she came out again, she was holding a small, pale envelope, the kind used for telegrams. She walked quickly toward the post office down the block. Maigret turned slightly, watching the way she moved, fast, but not confident. She kept her head low. The envelope vanished into the slot. The woman stood a moment longer than necessary, then looked around. Her eyes passed over him and did not stop. She left. Maigret lit his piper still. He didn't move. There had been something in her face, not fear. Precisely, closer to resignation, or perhaps something quieter still, the weight of a decision already made. The bell above the post office door tinkled as another customer went in. A girl with a green scarf emerged moments later, laughing into her mobile, umbrella forgotten. Maigret stepped off the curb. In his coat pocket, the tobacco smoldered gently, warming his fingers. He wasn't sure yet whether there had been a crime, only that something had passed between that woman and that envelope, not just a message, but a burden. It was still raining, but Maigret was walking now more purposefully toward the post office, not to ask questions, not yet, only to look, only to wait. It had begun, quietly, almost imperceptibly, like most things in Paris. Inside the post office on Rue Caulaincourt, the air was thick with the familiar odor of damp wool, ink, and old paper. The floor tiles were worn smooth, especially before the counter where people shuffled with letters and parcels. Maigret stepped in quietly, removing his hat and tapping the rain from its brim. No one looked up. An old man argued with the postal clerk about the weight of a package bound for Dijon. A girl in headphones waited behind him, her gaze fixed on her painted nails. Maigret waited, not in the queue, but near the rack of blank telegram forms. He picked one up absently, running a thumb along its stiff edge. The form was innocuous, a square of pale gray with space for 20 words. He studied it as if expecting a message to appear between the lines. Behind the glass, the postal clerk, a slim, balding man in a navy cardigan, was stamping parcels with a steady, distracted rhythm. His eyes moved with the rote efficiency of someone who had not been surprised in years. When the queue had thinned, Maigret approached, sliding the telegram form back into its slot. "Pardon," Maigret said softly. "Could you tell me, about 10 minutes ago, a woman posted a telegram here. Beige coat, brown shoes, 40-ish. A bit anxious." The clerk blinked at him, clearly weighing the oddity of the question against the stranger's calm authority. Maigret did not flash his credentials. He simply stood, hat in hand, as though he had all the time in the world. "Brown hair?" the clerk asked eventually. Maigret nodded. "She was here, yes, didn't say much, filled the form right there." He pointed to the low wooden shelf where a blotter and pen lay chained. "Paid cash, exact change." Maigret said nothing. The silence made the clerk fill it. Strange thing, though. She waited after she posted it. You know, like she wasn't sure she wanted to go. Then she just went out. Fast. Maigret nodded slowly. "You wouldn't remember what it said." "I suppose." The clerk gave a thin smile. "We don't read them. Just count the words and send." Of course. Maigret knew that. But he waited a beat longer, letting the silence stretch just enough for something else to surface. The clerk looked down. It was short, he added. 6 words, maybe 7. "Do you remember any of them?" The clerk frowned. "Something like, 'Don't come, it's already done.' Something like that. Not exact. I just remember it sounded odd. Almost like a warning." A pause. "Did she give a name?" Maigret asked. The clerk nodded. "Yes. Sender's name was Madame Leclerc. From the address on Rue des Trois Frères." Maigret gave a polite nod, then turned back toward the door. Rain smeared the glass as he stepped outside. The umbrella. Girl was gone. The square looked grayer than before, though it hadn't changed. Rue des Trois Frères wasn't far. A winding, narrow street climbing toward Sacré-Cœur, lined with second-hand bookstores and shuttered cafes. He walked slowly, the collar of his coat turned up against the drizzle. "Don't come. It's already done." The words turned over. In his mind like a coin flicked in the dark. He did not yet know what had been done. But it no longer mattered. The telegram had been sent. Something had ended, or begun. He moved on. Toward the sender. The climb up Rue des Trois Frères was not steep, but it felt long under the persistent drizzle. Maigret walked with the steady, quiet pace that marked him, not hurried, not hesitant, but with a purpose that emerged only as he moved. The street was quieter than most. A grocer's shop stood with its blinds half drawn, a tabby cat curled. On a crate of bruised apples, a woman with a red scarf was sweeping her step, the broom scratching softly against the wet pavement. He found number 18 between a closed patisserie and a shop that sold dusty postcards. A narrow building with 3 floors, its plastered facade streaked with age and soot. There was no concierge, just a brass call box with faded labels, many of them handwritten. Mme. Leclerc was penned in block letters on the 2nd floor. Button. The ink had run slightly, as though applied in haste or rain. Maigret pressed it. He heard the buzz of the lock and pushed the door open. Inside, the hallway smelled faintly of boiled cabbage and furniture polish. An umbrella stand overflowed. With damp sticks, there was no lift. He mounted the stairs slowly, taking in the sounds, the faint clatter of dishes above, a radio murmuring behind a door on the first landing, the creak of someone shifting their weight on old floor. Boards dotted the 2nd floor. He found her door. Slightly ajar. He hesitated, then knocked once. Gently. There was a pause. Then a voice, tight, cautious. "Yes, Madame Leclerc. I'd like a word." The door opened a little further. She stood behind it. The same woman from the post office, now holding it with her left hand. Up close, she looked more tired than she had from across the street. Her features were fine, pale from years without sun, her lips bare of makeup. Her brown hair was tied back loosely, and a faint line of sweat darkened her collar despite the coolness of the apartment. Yes, Maigret gave the small, courteous smile he reserved for uncertain company. Forgive me, I'm Inspector Maigret. Her eyes widened slightly, then narrowed, not in hostility, but calculation. There's been no crime. She said. No, Maigret agreed. Not yet. She didn't move aside, but she didn't close the door either. Her fingers were trembling. I saw you earlier, at the post office, Maigret continued. It was the telegram that caught my attention. I had to send it, she said quickly. I didn't want to, but I had to. Maigret said nothing. She stepped back. Come in then. The flat was small, modest, but meticulously clean. A dining table pressed against one wall, set for one. A beige sofa with a worn armrest. A single framed photograph of a man in a sailor's uniform on a shelf. Nothing else personal. No books, no clutter. It was the kind of flat one kept not out of love, but out of habit. She offered no coffee, no pleasantries. She sat down in a cane-backed chair and clasped her hands tightly. I sent it to my brother, she said. In Bordeaux. I told him not to come, that it was already done. Maigret lowered himself into the chair across from her. The wood creaked faintly under his weight. Madame Leclerc, he said quietly. What is it that's done? Her eyes flicked toward the window. Rain trailed softly down the glass. I thought by sending it, I was stopping something. He waited. She swallowed. My husband, Gerard, he's missing. Maigret tilted his head. Missing since yesterday evening. He left after dinner. Said he was going to meet someone about work. Her voice had steadied, but there was a tension behind it, a sense of something rehearsed. He never came home. Did you report it? No. Why not? She looked down at her lap. Because he does that sometimes, leaves for a day, then returns, and because I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't explain what. And if I reported it, it would make it real. Maigret took out his pipe but didn't light it. He turned it slowly in his hands. Your brother, he said. Why would he come? She hesitated. He knows Gerard and I were having trouble. He told me if anything happened, if I was in danger, I should send word. Danger. Her eyes were dry but rimmed red. Not that he hit me, nothing like that. But things changed. Gerard became distant. He started drinking more. He'd leave for whole nights. Sometimes he'd bring back money, sometimes nothing. I asked no questions. And yesterday, he was agitated, kept looking at his watch. I asked who he was meeting. He didn't answer. Maigret waited. She did not continue. You sent the telegram this morning, he said finally. But your husband disappeared yesterday evening. She nodded. Because I waited all night. I thought maybe he'd come back. And when he didn't, I thought. You thought he might not come back at all. Yes. Maigret leaned slightly forward. What did you mean? It's already done. She flinched. I don't know, she whispered. It just came into my head. It felt like something had ended. He didn't speak. The silence deepened, grew warm with the soft ticking of a clock on the mantel. Finally, she said, You don't believe me. I'm trying to understand. Her voice grew bitter. Understand what? That a woman sent a strange telegram and now her husband is missing. That doesn't make a crime, Inspector. No, Maigret agreed gently. But it makes a story, and stories have endings. She looked away again. The streetlights were beginning to glow faintly beyond the rain-streaked windows. I'll look into it, he said, rising. She didn't reply. At the door. He turned. Do you have a recent photograph of your husband? She stood, crossed to a drawer, and handed him a small picture. Gerard Leclerc, Broad face, deep-set eyes, thick dark mustache. Something cautious in the expression. "Thank you, Maigret," said, and left. Back in the street, the rain had turned into mist. The gas lamps flickered softly. He tucked the photograph into his pocket. Not a crime, not yet. But a man was missing, and a woman had sent a telegram that tasted of goodbye. He began walking, slowly, toward the station, toward Gerard Leclerc, toward whatever it was that had already been done. Back at the Quai des Orfèvres, the office was warm with the smell of damp coats and yesterday's tobacco. The rain had eased into a steady patter that rattled softly against the window panes. Maigret took off his coat, draped it over the radiator, and sat heavily at his desk. The photograph of Gerard Leclerc lay in front of him, its edges already curling. He lit his pipe at last, and for a moment let the silence settle around him. There was no official report, no missing persons file, no crime, only a telegram, a woman with fear in her bones, and a man who hadn't come home. He called for young Lapointe, who arrived within minutes, notebook in hand and his shoes still squeaking slightly from the rain. "Take a look at this," Maigret said, pushing the photograph across the desk. Lapointe studied it. Missing? Possibly. Gerard Leclerc. Disappeared yesterday evening. His wife didn't report it. Thought he might return. Lapointe waited. Sensing more, she sent a telegram this morning, Maigret added, to her brother in Bordeaux. Said, "Don't come. It's already done." Lapointe raised his eyebrows slightly. "Exactly." Maigret said, "We'll need to know more about him, where he works, who he drinks with, if he's in any kind of trouble. Address 18, Rue des Trois Frères, second floor." Madame Leclerc was cooperative enough, but frightened. Lapointe nodded, already scribbling. "Start at the usual places," Maigret said. "Bars, neighbors. Talk quietly." Lapointe left, his coat flapping. Behind him. Maigret remained still for a moment longer, letting the trail of smoke rise toward the ceiling. He knew the type, men who came and went from their homes like guests, who had just enough charm to disarm suspicion, just enough silence to hide things. They weren't criminals in the traditional sense. They simply drifted into situations they couldn't name until they could no longer drift out. By late afternoon, Lapointe returned with a damp notebook and a furrowed brow. "Well, he's known in a few cafes around Montmartre, mostly Le Bar du Carrefour, where he sometimes helped unload deliveries in exchange for drink. The barman there, Claude, says Gerard was in last night. Left around 10. Alone? No. He left with a man named Raymond Lachaume. Claude described him as stocky, mid-40s, always in a gray cap." Maigret nodded. "Did Claude say if they argued?" "No. Said they were talking quietly, then left together. But Lapointe hesitated. He also said Gerard was nervous, didn't drink much, kept checking his watch, like someone waiting for something, or dreading it," Lapointe added. Maigret's pipe had gone cold. He tapped it out, gently, and refilled it. "And Lachaume, he's a mechanic, runs a small garage near Place de Clichy, known to be on friendly terms with Gerard, though Claude said it wasn't the kind of friendship where you know a man's middle name." Maigret stood. "Let's take a walk." They found the garage tucked behind a row of shuttered shops. Its sign faded, the windows fogged with grease. A single light shone inside, casting pale reflections on the wet pavement. Raymond Lachaume looked up from under the hood of a battered Citroën. His face was as Claude had described, rough, square, and unreadable, with permanent black smudges around the fingernails. He didn't seem surprised to see them. "Police," he said, wiping his hands. "Inspector Maigret," Maigret said gently, "and this is Lapointe. We're looking into a man you might know, Gerard Leclerc." "Gerard." A pause. "What's happened?" "We're not sure. His wife says he's missing. You were with him last night." Lachaume nodded slowly. "We had a drink, walked part way home." Then I turned off toward my place. Did he say where he was going? No. He scratched his chin. He was jumpy, though. Said he needed to meet someone. I asked who. He just shook his head. You weren't worried? Leshum shrugged. With Gerard, you never knew. One day he's looking for work. Next he's flush with cash. Then he disappears for a week. Maigret studied him. Where does the money come from? Leshum gave a tight smile. If you find out, let me know. Did he ever mention someone called Jules? Or perhaps a woman, not his wife? Plenty of talk. Inspector. But Gerard, he had a way of not finishing sentences. They thanked him and left. Maigret didn't speak as they walked back toward the station. The wind was picking up now, stirring wrappers in the gutter. Lapointe finally broke the silence. What do you think? I think Gerard Leclerc was carrying something inside him that he didn't want to name. And now, Maigret stopped under a street lamp. Now, I want to talk to that barman again. And then I want to visit Rue des Trois Frères, not to speak, but to look. Lapointe gave him a curious glance. Look at what? Maigret exhaled. At the things people think they've hidden by dusting them. They returned to Le Bar du Carrefour just after dark. Claude, the barman, recognized them at once. You again, he said without resentment. Hoped you'd be back. Did Gerard speak to anyone else last night? Claude thought. There was a woman. Came in for just a moment. Didn't order. Just looked at him. Describe her. Dark coat. Short. Bit older than him. Maybe. But smart. Classy. Did she say anything? No. Just stood by the door. Gerard noticed her. Went pale. She turned and left. Maigret nodded. Did he follow? No. Just stared at his glass a long time after that. They thanked him again. Outside. The night was drawing its veil tighter around the city dot at Rue des Trois Frères. The building stood quiet. No lights on the second floor. Maigret stood in the street for a long time, watching the windows. Nothing moved dot inside that small flat. He imagined the silence, thick, familiar, oppressive. He lit his pipe again. Something about the woman at the bar, the uneaten dinner, the telegram sent in resignation rather than fear. It all gestured toward something that had happened long before Gerard vanished, the kind of thing that didn't shout. It whispered dot he would return tomorrow dot for now. He would wait and listen to what Paris said when no one thought it was speaking dot the next morning. Brought no sun. The clouds hung in a low ceiling over Paris, unmoved by wind or time. Maigret stood at the window of his office with a cup of coffee in hand, the warmth welcome against the stiffness in his fingers. He hadn't slept much. The details of Gerard Leclerc's disappearance sifted through his mind like dust through a sieve, never quite solid, always slipping. He kept returning to the woman in the dark coat. Not Madame Leclerc, the one seen at the bar, who entered and left without a word, but whose presence had startled Gerard like a slap. That kind of encounter wasn't casual. It meant something. And in Maigret's experience, it often meant the past had caught up with someone who thought they had outrun it. Lapointe arrived just after 8 with 2 cups and the usual tired enthusiasm of youth. No news from the gendarmes, he reported. No body in the river. No arrests. No sightings. Maigret nodded, accepting the second cup wordlessly. Did you follow up with Gerard's workplace? Such as it was, a delivery firm. But he hasn't been in steady work for months. Fired twice in the last year for absences. A few odd jobs since. And the neighbors, Lapointe hesitated. They heard some arguing last week. Nothing violent. One said Madame Leclerc was crying on the stairwell 2 nights ago. Did she say anything? Not to them. Just sat there, wiping her face. The neighbor offered her tea. She declined. Maigret exhaled through his nose and looked back toward the rain-glossed street below. Let's find the woman from the bar. Lapointe blinked. The one who came in and left without ordering. She mattered to him. You could see it in the reaction. That kind of silence is heavy. Where do we start? The cafe owner described her, short, classy, older than Gerard. Wheel. Begin with the assumption she wasn't there by chance. Ask the barman again. Then canvass the nearby streets. Look for any rooms rented to a woman fitting that description. Someone who doesn't quite belong in the neighborhood. It was the kind of work that took time, and Maigret never rushed it. He and Lapointe split up, one on foot, one by car, at Le Bar du Carrefour. Claude, the barman, tried to recall more. She came in maybe a minute or two after Gerard. He said, didn't speak, just stood by the door. I thought she might have changed her mind, the way she left so fast. But Gerard, well, he didn't look good after that. She'd been there before. Claude considered. Not that I noticed. Not a regular. Maigret thanked him and lingered on the street. The rain had paused, but the air still felt wet. He walked slowly past shopfronts, his eyes grazing doorbells and mailboxes. At a corner tobacconist, he noticed a name freshly taped over an old one. Simenon, second floor. The building was tidy in a way that suggested someone with fastidious habits. He rang. After a pause, a woman's voice came through the intercom. Yes, Madame Vernou. I'm Chief Inspector Maigret. May I have a moment? Silence. Then the door buzzed open. She met him on the stairs, not in fear, but with a strange kind of dignity. Her coat was black wool, neatly pressed. Her lipstick was faint but precise. Hair carefully combed back, pinned at the nape of her neck. She was in her 50s, perhaps early 60s, though her posture was firm. Inside, the flat was sparse and clean. A single suitcase stood near the corner, half-packed. A faint smell of perfume hung in the air, lavender. Maybe I knew someone would come, she said. Before he had asked a question, you were at the bar, Le Bar du Carrefour. You saw Gerard Leclerc. She nodded. I hadn't seen him in 17 years. Maigret sat on the small, hard-backed chair she gestured to. I wasn't planning to speak to him, she said. I thought I might watch him, see if time had done what prison couldn't. Maigret's brow moved faintly. Prison, for assault. Not against me, not officially. But I was the reason. Her voice remained calm. We were engaged once. Before he met his wife, before I understood what he was. You came looking for closure. I thought so. But when I saw him, nothing had changed. He was older, but not different. The same tension in his jaw, the same quick glance toward exits. Why now? I received a letter last week, she said, unsigned. But it told me he was in Paris again, that he'd taken up with a girl, that he was drinking, that maybe someone should warn his wife. Maigret nodded slowly. Did you send it? No, I burned it. But it stayed in my head. And then you found him. I walked past the bar on instinct. Saw him through the window. Then I went in. I don't know why. It wasn't courage. Just impulse. Maigret studied her. You didn't speak to him. No. He saw me. That was enough. I left. Did he follow? I don't think so. Maigret took a breath. Did you send a telegram to Bordeaux yesterday morning? No. Have you spoken to Madame Leclerc? She hesitated. No. But I thought of it. Do you know her? Only what I knew when he left me for her. She was younger. Believed the things he said. Maigret stood. You're leaving. She nodded. I think I've seen what I needed to. And it wasn't redemption. He paused at the door. If he turns up, I hope, for her sake. He does, but not for mine. Back on the street, Maigret stood a long while under the canopy of a flora sonning. The rain had begun again. The pieces were moving now, but still out of reach. A woman frightened enough to send a cryptic telegram. A husband with a past of violence. And, drifting, an old flame drawn to a ghost. And somewhere between all of them, silence. He returned to the Quai des Orfèvres near dusk. Lapointe was waiting. Anything, Maigret asked. Found a witness on Rue des Martyrs. Claims he saw Gerard get into a gray Peugeot late last night. No plates, no driver. Where? Outside a shuttered cinema, said Gerard. Looked like he was arguing. Then the car pulled away. Maigret lit his pipe slowly. Start tracing Peugeot owners in the area. Quietly, Lapointe nodded. Maigret turned to the window again. Outside, the city was folding itself into evening. No arrests, no confessions, no answers. But someone had sent a warning, and someone else might never come home. The next morning broke with no fanfare. Just the hush of rain on rooftops and the faint rumble of a distant garbage truck. Paris was unchanged. The newsstands opened. A man in a flat cap walked his dog. A bakery raised its shutters and began stacking fresh baguettes behind fogged glass. And Gerard Leclerc remained missing. Maigret sat in his shirt sleeves, reviewing his notes in longhand. The smell of his morning coffee mingled with the fainter, more permanent scent of pipe tobacco and old paper. There was something to this case that made him uneasy, though nothing in it was unusual. Men left, wives worried, lovers hovered, past sins circled back like pigeons to their roofs. What gnawed at him was the woman's telegram. "Don't come, it's already done." It had the air of something final, and Maigret had learned over the years to trust the tone of final things. Facts could lie, words could mislead, but the weight of a sentence, its posture, its breath, rarely did. Lapointe entered quietly, brushing droplets off his coat. "Nothing new from forensics," he said, placing a sheet of typed notes on Maigret's desk. "No body found. No sign of Gerard at any hospital, morgue, or overnight arrest." "And the Peugeot?" Lapointe nodded. "We traced 3 similar vehicles in Montmartre. One belongs to a man named Desruelles. He's a typesetter. Runs a small printing press in the 9th. Registered a gray Peugeot for 103, matching the description. Says it hasn't left his garage in 3 days. He's lying," Maigret said without looking up. Lapointe hesitated. "Why do you say that?" "Because people who haven't done anything don't say it quite so quickly." He stood, stretching slightly. "Let's pay Monsieur Desruelles a visit." The press was tucked into a narrow side street near Rue Milton, wedged between a disused atelier and a tobacconist's shop. The sign over the door read Imprimerie Desruelles, the paint peeling like a bad memory. Inside, the air was warm and close, thick with the iron-and-ink scent of old printing machines. A man in his 60s looked up from a cluttered desk. He had ink-stained fingers and wore a blue smock over a checked shirt. He looked tired, but not nervous. "Inspector Maigret," Maigret said, flashing his identification. "This is Inspector Lapointe. We're asking about a man named Gerard Leclerc." Desruelles' face shifted slightly. Not surprise, not alarm, a subtle tightening around the jaw. "I knew him," he said. "He came around sometimes, said he was looking for work. I gave him odd jobs, folding, binding, nothing permanent." "When did you last see him?" 3 days ago. "Not last night?" "No." Maigret moved slowly round the small space, touching the spine of a dusty ledger, looking at the type. Blocks scattered across a tray. "You own a gray Peugeot?" Desruelles nodded. "Yes, it's in the garage." "Used it recently?" "No. Been raining. Haven't had a need." Lapointe stepped outside to check the plates. Maigret stayed where he was, his eyes now on a photograph on the shelf behind Desruelles' head. A woman much younger, with hair pinned back and a guarded smile. Not Madame Leclerc, but possibly someone else. "Who is she?" Maigret asked, nodding toward the frame. Desruelles turned his head slowly. "My daughter. She live here?" "No, she died 5 years ago." Maigret waited. "Car accident," Desruelles added. "She was 27. "I'm sorry," Maigret said. Desruelles nodded once. Lapointe returned. "The car's there," he said. "Wet tires, but no recent tracks on the garage floor. Someone else could have used it," Maigret said. "A spare key?" Desruelles hesitated. "Only me. Would anyone else have access to the garage?" A few tenants have keys to the yard gate, but the garage is locked. Maigret nodded. If Gerard Leclerc came to you last night, hypothetically, why might he have done so? Desruelles gave a faint smile. To borrow money, or to hide. Did you ever feel he was in danger? A long pause. No, Desruelles said at last. I felt he was always circling something he wouldn't name. That's not the same as danger. Back on the street, the rain had returned in earnest. Maigret lit his pipe under the cover of a fruit stand's awning. He's telling the truth, Lapointe said. Maybe, but the truth can be a coat over something else, something he doesn't want to name. Maigret was thinking now of patterns, of men like Gerard who float from hand to hand, too proud to beg, too broken to settle. They were hard to find because they never landed. They only stopped when they were made to. They walked in silence toward Rue des Trois Frères again. Maigret didn't know why he wanted to go back, only that Madame Leclerc's silence had been incomplete, like a letter with its final sentence torn away. The same hallway, the same faint scent of soap and boiled potatoes. This time, when they knocked, she answered quickly. She looked pale but composed, as if something inside her had already gone still. I have nothing new, she said. Perhaps, Maigret replied, but I do. She stepped aside without a word. Inside, the table was cleared. No dishes, no signs of meals or books. The kind of emptiness that wasn't laziness, but preparation. You're expecting something, he said. She didn't answer. Maigret took the photograph of Gerard from his coat pocket and placed it gently on the table. Do you believe he's alive? He asked. Her hands moved, barely, as if she meant to reach for the photo and stopped. I don't know what I believe, she whispered. You sent that telegram because you were afraid your brother would find out what you'd already accepted. A long pause. He won't come back, she said at last, not because he's dead, but because he never really lived here. What do you mean? He passed through, she said. Through my life, through everyone's. He didn't stop, not even for himself. Who would he go to if he were trying to disappear? A flicker in her eyes. Then stillness. Maigret leaned back. There's another woman, isn't there? She looked away. Someone who knew him before. Someone who never stopped waiting. Maigret stood. If he's hiding, we'll find him. If he's not, someone else already has. He turned at the door. Tell me one thing, Madame Leclerc. Did you send that telegram to stop your brother from coming, or to stop yourself from asking for help? She didn't answer, but her silence said everything. Maigret hadn't intended to involve Inspector Lagnon, but when he returned to the Quai des Orfèvres that afternoon, his coat damp and the weight of too many silences tugging at his shoulders, there was Lagnon in the corridor, like a wet umbrella someone had forgotten to close. His coat was buttoned badly, his collar turned half up, half down. His eyes, as always, were bleak and suspicious, still chasing shadows. Maigret, Lagnon asked, attempting irony but only managing weariness. Maigret didn't answer. He walked past, but Lagnon followed, the way a dull headache might. Missing man, isn't it? I heard whispers, no charges, no corpse, and no paperwork, which means it's all intuition and sentiment. Maigret turned. Yes, he said mildly, exactly. Lagnon blinked, caught off guard by the agreement. You have something, or just poking around in the fog. I have a name, Gerard Leclerc. A wife who's already said goodbye. A bar he was afraid to sit in. A woman he once hurt. And a telegram that sounds too much like a confession. That's not a lead. Lagnon muttered, it's a diary. Maigret almost smiled. You're right, which is why I need someone like you to check the boring parts. Lagnon's eyes narrowed. Find out where Gerard kept his money, if he ever had a bank account. Check his national identity records, travel documents, anything that suggests he was planning to go elsewhere. Lagnon grunted, but took the assignment. When he'd gone, Maigret sat in silence for a long time, staring at the envelope where he'd tucked away the telegram form. He hadn't brought it out much. There was something to intimate about it, as if unfolding it again would let its chill escape. He placed it carefully on his desk, looked at the slant of the handwriting, the restraint of 7 words, "Don't come." "It's already done." He found himself repeating it aloud, softly, listening not to the words, but to the rhythm. 7 words, but not a warning, a dismissal, a quiet sealing off of possibilities. By late afternoon, Lapointe returned with a small file from the prefecture's registry office. Gerard Leclerc had once applied for a travel visa 2 years ago to Belgium. The form had been filled out sloppily, the ink smeared in places. The destination was vague, Liege, but he never collected the visa. It remained archived, untouched. "Liege?" Maigret asked. Lapointe shrugged. "No family there. No friends listed. Possibly a bluff or a past," Maigret murmured. The printing press came back into his thoughts. Desruelles, the ink, the girl in the photograph, the Peugeot that hadn't moved, yet somehow had. He walked slowly to the window. The street below was full of umbrellas again, black, navy, dark green, bobbing like beetles against the gray. Lagnon reappeared near 5 o'clock. Wet again, still irritable. "Nothing in the bank accounts," he said, dropping a file. He had one, closed 6 months ago, 33 francs left in it. No savings, no pension, not even debts, just air. He lived on cash, scrounged it, borrowed it, drank it. Maigret nodded. "Thank you." Lagnon hovered a moment, then, curious despite himself, asked, "What do you think happened?" To him, Maigret looked up. "I think Gerard Leclerc was tired of waiting for something to catch up with him. So he stopped running, which means he chose to vanish. Or someone helped him do it." Lagnon snorted. "That's not much of a case." "No," Maigret agreed. "But it's a very good story." He left the office shortly after. Not home, not yet. Instead, he walked, his usual habit when the edges of a case became soft. He drifted toward Montmartre again, past shuttered shops and cafes beginning to switch on their yellow lights. He passed Rue des Trois Frères but didn't stop. He passed La Barre du Carrefour and caught a glimpse of Claude wiping down the counter inside. Eventually, he stopped near the Square Louise Michel, the trees bare and shivering in the dusk. The wind carried a faint scent of roasted chestnuts from a cart nearby. And then he saw her. Not Madame Leclerc, the other woman, Vernou, coat buttoned high, gloves on, hat tilted just so. She was standing near a bench, staring up at the glowing dome of Sacré-Cœur, half obscured by mist, her suitcase set neatly beside her. Maigret approached quietly. "I thought you'd gone," he said. She didn't flinch. "I meant to." "What stopped you?" She looked at him, eyes dry but dark. "Memory. It never stays packed." He sat beside her on the bench. She didn't object. "Did you see him again?" he asked. A long silence. "No, but I felt him. Somewhere nearby, not walking the streets. Just gone from them." "You still loved him?" "I think I loved the idea of a version of him. A man who had once needed me. That's a hard thing to stop needing." They sat in silence a while. The suitcase at her feet seemed heavier now, not with belongings, but with restraint. "Maigret, Rose, if you remember anything that feels small, even, I'd like to hear it." She nodded. "I won't leave just yet," she said. "I don't think I've said goodbye properly." As he walked away, Maigret felt the fog thickening, both in the air and in the case. But something had shifted. The people around Gerard were beginning to let go. And sometimes when that happened, a missing man found himself visible again. Not because he returned, but because he could no longer hide behind the weight of other people's hope. Maigret lit his pipe. Somewhere in the night, the rain began again. The following morning, The rain had paused again, as if Paris herself were holding her breath. The streets were still damp, and the puddles on Rue des Trois Frères reflected the gray sky like open eyes. Maigret arrived without Lapointe, without fanfare. He walked alone, coat buttoned and collar turned up, hands buried deep in his pockets. He was not there to question. He had done enough of that. He was there to look. He paused just outside number 18, gazing up at the modest façade. One curtain on the second floor twitched slightly, then stilled. Madame Leclerc was awake. She always was. Maigret climbed the stairs slowly, stopping on the landing before her door. He didn't knock. He listened inside, the faint sound of a radio, too low to make out words. A cup setting down gently, a breath, the life of someone waiting. He knocked. Then, not loudly, Madame Leclerc opened the door already dressed, her hair pinned back, her cardigan buttoned. She looked like someone prepared for a visit from no one in particular. "Come in," she said before he could speak. The flat had changed. A few drawers had been emptied. A pair of men's shoes stood near the window, oddly placed, as if someone had considered putting them away, and then hadn't. "Are you moving?" Maigret asked. "No," she said. "Just tidying. Sometimes I feel I'm still waiting for him to walk through the door, and I hate that." He nodded. "Sometimes a room holds someone long after they've gone." She looked toward the shoes. "I told myself if I gave everything a place, I wouldn't need to ask questions anymore. I could just carry on." Maigret didn't answer. Instead, he walked slowly across the room, letting his eyes settle on small things, a pile of old receipts on the table, a chipped cup with coffee dried at the bottom, a torn envelope in the waste bin. "May I?" he asked, pointing to the bin. She hesitated, then nodded. Maigret crouched and lifted the envelope. No return address. The postmark was smudged, but faint letters suggested it came from Liege. The handwriting was unfamiliar, all capital letters, the kind people use when they don't want to be known. He looked up at her. "I thought it was a mistake," she said quietly. "I opened it, and there was nothing inside. Just a single page blank. No note, no, just the envelope." "When did it arrive?" "2 days before he disappeared." Maigret folded the envelope and slipped it into his coat. "And you said nothing?" "I didn't think it mattered. Or maybe I was afraid it did." The silence between them was heavy, but not unkind. "Did Gerard see it?" She nodded. "He didn't say anything, just looked at it for a long time, then left the flat." "Was he angry?" "No, not then. Just quiet, like something had finally come for him." Maigret thought of the travel visa application to Liege, the unsent plans, the slow drift backward into a place he'd once tried to leave. She turned her face to the window. "I sometimes think he went there not to escape, but to be found." Maigret rose. "I think you're right." He left her there, seated near the window, one hand resting on the table, not moving. She did not cry. She did not plead. She merely watched the city and its unknowable rhythms, her face calm but distant. At the Quai d'Orfèvres, Maigret placed the envelope under a desk lamp. The faint traces of a fold line suggested something had once been inside. A note, a slip, perhaps even a photograph. But the paper was gone now. Whether Gerard had destroyed it or hidden it, Maigret couldn't know. Lapointe entered with news. "We found a boarding house," he said, "near Gare du Nord. An elderly concierge there says a man matching Gerard's description checked in a week ago. Used a false name, René Masson. Paid in cash. Left 2 days ago. No explanation. Left anything behind? No. Room was empty. But the concierge said he seemed unwell, not sick. More like waiting to fall." Maigret nodded. "Did he receive visitors?" "Yes, once. A man in a gray coat. Didn't give a name." Maigret lit his pipe. The image formed slowly in his mind. Gerard hunched on a narrow bed, the bare bulb above him casting a shadow across the wall. A man who had never really stayed anywhere, not even in his own marriage. A man who had done something, or perhaps hadn't, and was now living in the space after that choice. He thought again of Madame Leclerc's words, "He never really lived here," and Verneu's bitter grace, "I don't think I've said goodbye properly." What held them all? Wife, former lover, even himself, was not certainty, but the fog of absence, not knowing whether to grieve or to wait. Later that evening, Maigret returned to Rue des Trois Frères one last time. He didn't knock. He stood in the street, watching the second-floor window, lit faintly from within. A figure passed behind the curtain. Then stillness. He didn't need to speak to her again. What she had to say had already been spoken, not in confession, but in the way her voice softened when she stopped hoping. He turned and walked away slowly, the chill in the air sharper now, the rain just beginning again in soft, measured taps. On the rooftops. Somewhere, in Liege, perhaps, or deeper in Paris, Gerard Leclerc might still be alive, ordering a drink, folding envelopes, walking under a different name. But something had ended, and Maigret knew that sometimes. Knowing the ending was enough, even when the story itself slipped through your fingers like mist. 2 days later, it arrived. Maigret found it on his desk that morning, atop a neat stack of routine reports and circulars, a plain envelope, unmarked, except for his name, typed in all capital letters, no stamp, no return address. It had been delivered by hand. He turned it over once, twice, then opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typewritten, simple, no greeting, no signature, just 8 short lines. I did not want to be found. I did not disappear out of fear. It was the weight of staying that became too heavy. I am not dead, but something in me is. Tell her nothing. Let her guess. The telegram was hers, not mine. A woman can know something is over even before it ends. Thank you for not pushing harder. Maigret read it once, then again, more slowly. He didn't feel surprise, not really. He felt what he often felt at the end of certain cases. Not triumph, not closure, but something like stillness. He placed the letter face down and poured a cup of lukewarm coffee from the pot on the sideboard. Rain traced the windows again. Outside, Paris moved as it always did. Buses sighing along boulevards, men in hats crossing damp intersections, cafes opening their doors with the rattle of chains and the creak of awnings. The message confirmed what Maigret already suspected. Gerard Leclerc was gone, but not buried. He had taken his life, not in the final sense, but in the quieter one. Chosen disappearance over confrontation. A kind of cowardice, yes, but also a kind of peace. He thought again of Madame Leclerc, her pale face by the window, her quiet certainty. He won't come back, not because he's dead, but because he never really lived here. And Verneux, seated with her suitcase near the Sacre-Cœur, her eyes hollow but not pleading. I don't think I've said goodbye properly. They had known. Women like them always did. Long before the men around them made decisions. They could see the end coming, even if they couldn't prevent it. Maigret stepped out mid-morning. He walked not to the station, not to the ministry, but to Rue des Trois Frères, for the last time. The building was still, the door stiff with damp. He climbed the stairs as before, slowly, hands in his pockets. He knocked once, gently. Madame. Leclerc answered, no surprise in her eyes. I expected you. He handed her the letter without speaking. She unfolded it without hesitation, as though she had already imagined every word. When she finished, she didn't cry. She didn't sit down. She just stood there, holding the paper lightly, like it was something living she didn't want to wake. Did he write this? She asked. Maigret nodded. Delivered to the station this morning. A pause. It sounds like him, she said. Then I knew he wouldn't do anything dramatic. He never did. He just slipped away. Maigret said nothing. There was nothing to say. "I'll keep this," she said finally, folding the paper once carefully. She didn't offer him coffee, and he didn't stay. At the door, she said, "Thank you for being kind." "I wasn't kind," Maigret replied, "only patient." She smiled, the smallest thing, just the corner of her mouth, and shut the door gently. Later that afternoon, Maigret walked up the hill again. Montmartre had dried slightly in the sun's weak return, though clouds still hovered like regrets. He found Vernou exactly where he had left her 2 days ago, on the bench near the square. Her suitcase still at her feet, her coat neatly buttoned. "You stayed," he said. Not needing to ask why, she nodded. "I had nowhere urgent to be." He handed her a second copy of the letter, one he had typed himself. "I thought you might want to know." She read it silently. Her lips didn't move, but he could see the words pass across her face like shadows. When she finished, she folded it once, then again, and placed it into her coat pocket. "Was there ever a case?" she asked. "No," Maigret said. "Just people." She looked down at her suitcase. "I think I'll go home tomorrow." "Where is home?" She gave a tired smile. "Anywhere he isn't." They sat for a while, the sky shifting from gray to dull gold above them. Paris moved on below, unaware. Before he left, Maigret asked, "If he had come to you, not at the bar, but later, would you have taken him back?" She didn't look at him when she answered. "No," she said, "but I would have let him stay the night." He nodded and stood. As he walked away, he knew he wouldn't see her again, nor Madame Leclerc, nor Gerard, but he would remember them, not as suspects or victims, but as fragments, people caught in the slow unraveling of quiet lives. He returned to the quai d'Orfèvres as the first drops of rain began again, and when he sat at his desk, the case was already closing in his mind, not filed, not solved, but folded away like the letter in his drawer. He poured another cup of coffee. Outside, the city breathed. By Thursday, the rain had settled back into its rhythm, a soft percussion. On Paris rooftops, steady, unobtrusive, it filled the gutters and glazed the windows, polished the benches in the Square du Vert Galant, and silvered the streets with reflection. Inside the Quai d'Orfèvres, the rooms smelled of damp wool and old radiators. It was a day for keeping quiet. Maigret sat behind his desk, not reading reports, not writing them. Either. He was turning his pipe slowly in his hand, though it was unlit. There were no new leads, no open questions. The case, if one could even call it that, had ended with a typed letter, and to face his learning to live with its silence. The official file would remain thin. Missing person, presumed. Voluntary disappearance. No crime reported. No body recovered. No suspect pursued. But for Maigret, there was more than enough in what wasn't written. Gerard Leclerc had vanished like a boat slipping off the dock before dawn, quietly with no ripple. But he had not vanished without leaving a wake. At noon, Lapointe entered with a small bundle under his arm, a stack of notes, mostly observational. He looked tired, but curious. Still nothing from Liege. He said, "There won't be." Maigret replied. Lapointe sat. "So we just let it go." Maigret gave him a long, steady look. "Letting go isn't the same as giving up." Lapointe nodded, though the distinction seemed philosophical at best. He could come back. Lapointe said, "No," Maigret said simply. "He's already gone. Whether he's alive or not doesn't matter. The man his wife knew, the man." Vernou remembered. "He's already disappeared." They sat in silence for a while. Then Lapointe asked, "Would you have gone after him if there'd been more?" Maigret tapped his pipe on the edge of the ashtray. "If he'd killed someone, yes. If there'd been danger, yes. But this was not a crime. This was a man folding inward. There's no rest for vanishing from your own life." Lapointe didn't respond. He knew the inspector wasn't asking for agreement. A few minutes later, Maigret rose and slipped on his coat. "I'm going out." "Should I come?" "No, outside." The rain greeted him like an old friend, not intrusive, just present. Maigret didn't take a car. He walked down toward the Seine, where the river moved thick and silent beneath the bridges. The water looked heavy today, like it carried more than rain, perhaps memory. He turned onto Rue Caulaincourt, retracing old steps. The tobacconist where he'd first seen Madame Leclerc had changed its display. The post office still bore the chipped paint around the door. A man with a canvas bag waited outside, fidgeting. Maigret stepped in. The clerk behind the counter recognized him with a blink, but said nothing. "Busy today?" Maigret asked. The clerk shook his head. Slower in the rain. Maigret lingered a moment longer, glancing at the telegram forms again. He picked one up, then changed his mind and set it down. "I think that woman Madame Leclerc was the first person in years to send a message not for information, but for mercy." The clerk didn't respond. He looked down, fiddling with a rubber stamp. Maigret stepped back out into the rain. He stood under the eaves and lit his pipe at last. The tobacco caught slowly, the warmth climbing into his lungs. He didn't visit Madame Leclerc again, nor did he return to the square near the Sacre-Cœur. There was nothing more to see. The quiet had settled. What stayed with him were the subtleties, the way Gerard's shoes had remained by the window, like a man expecting to come home. The way Madame Leclerc had folded the letter, not as evidence, but as inheritance. The way Vernou had said, "I would have let him stay the night." They were not women of drama. They were women of endurance. They'd built their lives around a man who had already been elsewhere, even when present. What they mourned was not death, but vacancy. Back at the quay, Maigret filed the letter in a folder labeled simply Leclerc, Gerard. No subcategory, no urgency, just a name. He thought of all the other folders in the cabinet. Violent cases, bitter endings, jealousies turned bloody. And then this one, a man who chose not to stay. There was something quieter in that choice, but no less weighty. That evening, as the office emptied and lights dimmed across the corridor, Maigret stayed at his desk. He poured a final glass of beer from a small bottle tucked in the bottom drawer. The foam settled quickly. He sipped it in silence, eyes fixed on the rain pooling on the windowsill. It was nearly dark when he put on his coat again. He left the letter in the drawer, locked it with the small brass key, and stood for a long moment, listening to the building breathe its tired breath. Outside, Paris glowed faintly under the street lamps. The wet cobblestones reflected soft gold. A dog barked once, distant and disinterested. Maigret walked home slowly, past shuttered kiosks and closed cafes, his steps measured and unhurried. He was not troubled, only thoughtful. The telegram had been sent. The message had been received, and now it would rain, just as it always did, evenly, quietly, on those who left, and those who remained, and those, like Maigret, who understood both. The story might have ended there, with the rain, the letter, and the quiet departure of Gerard Leclerc, but it did in single quotes 2 weeks later, on a cold, windless morning, a telegram arrived at the Quai des Orfèvres. It wasn't addressed to Maigret. It was addressed to Madame Leclerc, care of the police. The telegram bore a Belgian stamp. The handwriting, this time in a tight, deliberate script, was unmistakably Gerard's. "Forgive the silence. It was not a punishment. I needed to be smaller than I was. I won't come back, but I won't disappear completely. If you ever need me, write to Rue Ferenstrie, Liege. Use your name only. I'll know." The message was unsigned. Maigret read it in his office, without a coat, in shirt sleeves, as if some part of him had been waiting for it. He studied the paper, touched the indentations where the pen had pressed too hard. It was a confession of sorts, not of guilt, but of retreat. He folded it, placed it in a fresh envelope, and walked once more to Rue des Trois Frères. The flat had not changed. The same quiet, the same slightly open window letting in the same chilled air. Madame Leclerc opened the door and accepted the envelope without a word. She did not open it while he was there. She did not need to. She held it as one might hold a letter from a man already buried, slowly, respectfully, without surprise. "He's not asking to return," she said, looking at the envelope as if it breathed. "Just to be remembered." Maigret nodded. "And will you write to him?" She thought for a long time. "I don't know. Perhaps. Not now." Maigret turned to go, but she stopped him with a question. "Do you think he ever meant to leave for good?" He paused. "No," he said quietly. "I think he waited for someone to stop him. And when no one did, he kept walking." She nodded. "Once, slowly. Then that's how it ends." But it didn't end, Maigret thought. Not really. There were no endings with men like Gerard. Only absences that stretched until they felt like conclusions. But there was no body, no trial, no widow in black. Just a woman who would fold a telegram into a drawer and touch it sometimes. When the city was still, back at his desk, Maigret wrote a final note in the file. Subject presumed alive in Liege. No criminal intent established. Case closed pending. Further developments. Silence accepted as verdict. He closed the folder, tapped it once, and placed it in the cabinet. Then he poured a cup of coffee, leaned back in his chair, and listened to the slow ticking of the wall clock. He thought of Madame Leclerc, alone but certain, of Vernou, walking back toward her own life with nothing but memory and grace, of Gerard, not gone, not safe, just elsewhere. He looked out the window. The rain had stopped. The streets were clean. A boy pushed a bicycle across the square, and a woman opened her shutters to air the house. Nothing had exploded. No arrest had been made. But the story had resolved, not loudly, not cleanly, but quietly, like most truths do. Maigret lit his pipe. The case was over, and life, as always, had gone on.